The streets of Las Vegas were alive with flashing lights, ringing slot machines, and the hum of people chasing luck. In a small apartment on the edge of the city, a man sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. He was once a respected FBI agent, known for solving high-profile cases and catching dangerous criminals. But those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now he lived quietly, working small security jobs and avoiding the world that had once defined him. The weight of his past followed him everywhere. He had left the bureau after a mission went terribly wrong. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a nightmare he couldn't escape. A man he trusted betrayed him, a key operation crumbled, and worst of all, his closest partner lost his life. The guilt of that day was something he never spoke about, but it haunted him every time he closed his eyes. The only thing that kept him connected to that part of his life was his promise to watch over his partner's daughter. She was like family to him, a reminder of the man he once was. That night, as he leaned back in his chair, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, a sudden vibration made his heart skip. He glanced down at the screen and saw an unknown number. At first, he thought it was spam, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened the message, and the color drained from his face. There was a picture. A young woman sat in a dimly lit room, fear in her eyes, her hands tied behind her back. His breath caught in his throat. It was her, the one person he swore he would always protect. Beneath the picture was a short message. If you want her alive, come to the Mirage Casino. Midnight. He froze, staring at the words over and over again. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to breathe. This couldn't be real. Maybe it was some sick prank. But deep down he knew better. He had enemies, people who hated him for the things he'd done as an agent. If someone had taken her, this was personal. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and started pacing the room. Memories of her childhood flashed through his mind. The way his partner used to smile when talking about her, how she'd call him uncle when she was little. She had nothing to do with his old world of crime and violence, but now she was caught in the crossfire. He clenched his fists. Whoever had done this was making a mistake, because he wasn't the man he used to be. He was more dangerous now. He pulled out his old service weapon from a locked box in the closet, a piece of his life he thought he'd left behind. As he loaded it, his thoughts raced. There were questions, too many of them. Who had taken her? Why? And why tonight? He checked the clock, 10:15 p.m. He had less than 2 hours. The streets of Vegas felt different as he drove toward the city center. He blended into the crowd, but inside, every muscle in his body was tense. The lights and sounds that once felt exciting now seemed like a distraction, a cover for something sinister. The Mirage Casino towered over the strip, its gold-tinted windows glowing under the night sky. He parked a few blocks away, scanning the streets for anything unusual. Years of training made him cautious, but nothing could calm the storm in his chest. Inside the casino, the atmosphere was loud and chaotic. Tourists lined up at slot machines, gamblers filled the poker tables, and servers rushed by with trays of drinks. No one would suspect that somewhere in this building, a young woman's life hung in the balance. He moved slowly, observing every detail, the cameras, the exits, the security guards. Whoever sent that message wanted him here, and he had a feeling this was more than a simple kidnapping. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Go to the private elevator. Show this picture to the guard. Attached was a photo of him from years ago, taken during his time as an agent. His pulse quickened. Someone had been watching him closely. He found the elevator tucked away at the back of the casino floor. A large man in a dark suit stood by the door, his expression cold. Without saying a word, he held up the phone, showing the picture. The guard nodded, stepped aside, and pressed a key card against the panel. The doors opened, revealing a plush elevator that felt out of place in the noisy casino. As he stepped in, the guard gave him a small smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. The ride up was silent. He adjusted his jacket, his hand resting near his holster. He didn't know what awaited him on the top floor, but he knew one thing. This wasn't about money. This was personal. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors slid open. The hallway beyond was lined with expensive art, dimly lit with golden lights. It felt like stepping into another world, one far removed from the chaos below. At the end of the hallway was a large set of double doors. He approached slowly, every step calculated, his senses heightened. When he pushed the doors open, the scene inside made his blood run cold. A lavish suite had been transformed into something much darker. In the center of the room, seated in an ornate chair, was a man he recognized instantly. He was older now, heavier, but the sharpness in his eyes was unmistakable. This was no ordinary criminal. This was a man who had once ruled a piece of Vegas's underworld, someone the FBI had spent years trying to take down. "Welcome," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "It's been a long time." The former agent said nothing, his eyes darting around the room until they landed on her. She was there, sitting on a chair near the window, her wrists bound, tears streaking her face. Relief and anger surged through him at once. The man chuckled softly. "Relax. She's fine for now. But you and I have unfinished business." He clenched his jaw, his hand tightening into a fist. He remembered this man's face from old case files, remembered the chaos he caused and the lives destroyed. He thought he'd left all that behind, but tonight proved he was wrong. "Why her?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "Because I wanted your attention," the man replied with a smirk. "And now that I have it, let's make this interesting." The man leaned back in his chair, his smile as sharp as the knife tucked into his jacket pocket. His presence filled the room, even though he didn't raise his voice. He had the kind of calm confidence that came from years of power, money, and fear. The agent, once a man who hunted people like him, stood perfectly still, but inside, every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready for whatever was coming. "You've been hiding for a long time," the man said smoothly. "I have to admit, I thought you'd grown soft. Walking away from the bureau, living a quiet life. I wondered if you'd even show up tonight. But here you are." The agent's eyes flicked toward the young woman tied to the chair. She was pale, her breathing quick and shallow. Her fear was visible, and his stomach churned with guilt. This wasn't just about him anymore. She didn't deserve to be here. He forced himself to meet the man's gaze. "You didn't bring me here just to talk." The man chuckled, tapping his fingers on the armrest. "You're right. Talking isn't really my style." He stood, his expensive shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. "This is about payback. Do you remember my brother?" The words hit hard. Memories he had buried deep began to surface. He did remember. Years ago, during an intense FBI operation, his team had brought down one of the biggest organized crime networks in Las Vegas. That operation had put the man's younger brother behind bars for life. He could still picture the raid, the chaos, the way everything unfolded like a scene out of a nightmare. The case had been a success on paper, but it had left scars, especially for the family of the man standing in front of him now. "You took everything from me," the man continued, stepping closer. "My business, my reputation, my family. My brother rots in prison because of you. And you got to walk away like a hero. But I'm not interested in your death. No, that's too easy. I want to watch you suffer. I want to break you." The agent's jaw tightened, his heart pounding in his ears. He didn't speak. He knew better than to give this man the satisfaction of a reaction. The man smirked and gestured toward a door at the far end of the suite. Two large guards stepped forward, opening it to reveal something unexpected. Beyond the doorway was a wide staircase leading down. Dim, red lighting flickered against the walls, and the sound of muffled voices echoed from below. It felt like stepping into a different world, one hidden beneath the glamour of the casino. "Come," the man said, motioning for him to follow. "It's time I show you where your real punishment begins." One guard grabbed the young woman, pulling her chair roughly toward the stairs. She whimpered softly, fear tightening her voice. The agent's hands curled into fists, every instinct screaming at him to act, but he forced himself to stay calm. If he moved too soon, she'd be dead before he could take a single step. They descended into a large underground chamber, far removed from the glitz and chaos of the casino above. The air smelled faintly of sweat, alcohol, and money. The room was circular, filled with rows of velvet seats occupied by well-dressed men and women sipping drinks and murmuring excitedly. At the center of it all was a fighting ring, its ropes worn and stained, surrounded by bright lights and cameras. It wasn't just a fight club. It was a spectacle. The man stepped into the ring, spreading his arms as if he were welcoming an audience. Cheers and whistles erupted from the crowd, and the agent realized this wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was entertainment. Rich gamblers were placing bets, laughing, and shouting over each other. This was an underground empire built on violence, and tonight he was the star attraction. The young woman was dragged to a small cage on the side of the ring. She was forced inside, the lock clicking shut. Her terrified eyes met his, and he felt a cold wave of anger wash over him. This wasn't just revenge. This was a game. The man turned back to him, his grin widening. "Here's how this works," he said. "You fight me. No weapons, no backup, just you and me. If you win, she goes free. You walk out of here alive, and I let you both disappear. But if you lose," he paused, glancing at the cage, "she dies right in front of you. And I promise I won't make it quick." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a burst of cheers. The man was feeding off their excitement, turning this into a show. The agent, however, felt his blood run cold. This was exactly the kind of trap he had trained his entire life to avoid, yet here he was cornered. The man tossed a pair of worn boxing gloves onto the mat. "You've got until tomorrow night to prepare. I want to see if the great agent still has a fight left in him. And don't even think about calling for help. This is my world now. Every guard, every camera, every exit, you're surrounded." The agent's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay composed. He had been in dangerous situations before. He had faced criminals, shootouts, and impossible odds. But this felt different. This wasn't an arrest or a case. This was a fight for her life, and maybe his own soul. The guards escorted him out of the arena and back up the stairs. Every step echoed in his ears, his mind racing. This wasn't just about brute strength. This was psychological warfare. The man wanted to see him break, to strip him of the control and discipline he had built over years of service. Once they reached the lobby of the casino, the guards released him. "Tomorrow night," one of them said flatly. "Midnight. Don't be late." As he walked out into the night air, the neon lights of Las Vegas felt blinding. People passed him on the sidewalk, laughing, drinking, and enjoying the city, completely unaware of the dark world that existed beneath their feet. He leaned against his car for a moment, his hands gripping the roof tightly. Fear, anger, and guilt churned in his chest, but underneath it all, there was something else, a spark of determination. He had less than 24 hours to prepare. If he wanted to save her, he'd need every skill, every ounce of training, and every connection he had left. Driving home, his mind shifted into focus. He couldn't outmuscle this man, but maybe he could outsmart him. The fight wasn't just physical, it was strategic. If he was going to survive tomorrow night, he'd need to be faster, smarter, and more ruthless than ever before. Back in his apartment, he opened a locked drawer and pulled out an old photo. It was of him and his partner, smiling after their first big case. He stared at the picture for a long time, his throat tightening. "I'll bring her home," he whispered to himself. "No matter what it takes." The sun was barely rising over Las Vegas, casting a soft orange glow across the city skyline. The streets were quieter than usual, the chaos of the night replaced with a strange calm that felt out of place. In his small apartment, the man sat at his kitchen table again, staring at the same cold cup of coffee from the night before. Sleep had escaped him. His mind was spinning, replaying every detail from the underground arena, every word the crime boss had said. The image of her, locked in that cage with fear in her eyes, burned into his memory. He had promised her father that he would always protect her, and he had failed. Now, this fight wasn't just about saving her. It was about redemption. He pushed the cup aside and reached for his old leather duffel bag, one he hadn't touched in years. The zipper was stiff, but inside were pieces of his past, an old tactical knife, a pair of worn combat gloves, and a faded FBI badge he no longer carried. He had thought he'd left this life behind, but life had a way of pulling him back in when he least expected it. He needed to prepare. The man he was about to face wasn't just a gangster. He was a fighter. Years of power and violence had turned him into a predator, someone who thrived in chaos. The agent had fought criminals before, but never like this. He knew the fight wouldn't just test his strength, it would test his will to survive. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through old contacts, unsure if anyone would even answer after all these years. Finally, he stopped at a name, a former Marine buddy who had once saved his life in a raid overseas. He hit call. "Still alive, old man," a gruff voice answered on the second ring. "I need your help," he said, his tone flat but urgent. "It's bad." There was a pause, then a sigh. "You never call unless you're in trouble. Where are you?" An hour later, they met at a small, private gym tucked away in a quiet part of the city. It was the kind of place where fighters trained away from the spotlight. The air smelled faintly of sweat and leather, and the walls were lined with punching bags and worn-down equipment. His friend, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running across his jaw, raised an eyebrow when he walked in. "You look like you haven't slept in days," his friend said, tossing him a bottle of water. "Didn't have time," he replied. "I've got less than 24 hours. A fight. Life or death." His friend frowned. "Tell me everything." The agent explained the situation, leaving out no detail. The kidnapping, the crime boss, the underground arena. His friend listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When he finished, his friend whistled softly. "You're in deep. This guy isn't just testing you. He's trying to kill you in front of an audience. Which is why I need to be ready," he said firmly. "No rules, no safety nets. I need to fight smart." His friend studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's get to work." The next several hours were a blur of training. They started with conditioning, short, brutal bursts of movement designed to push him past exhaustion. He ran sprints, slammed medicine balls, and worked his core until his muscles burned. He had to be fast, agile, and unbreakable. Then came the fighting drills. His friend taught him techniques for close combat, focusing on speed and leverage rather than brute force. "You're not going to outmuscle this guy," his friend said, demonstrating a move. "But you can outthink him. Use his size against him." They practiced takedowns, counterstrikes, and chokeholds. Every punch he threw was corrected, every step adjusted. Between rounds, they sat on the edge of the ring, drenched in sweat. His friend tossed him a towel. "You know, this isn't just about fighting," his friend said quietly. "This is about control. That guy wants you scared, desperate. You can't give him that satisfaction." He nodded, wiping the sweat from his face. "I know. He's expecting me to fight like I'm cornered. I'm going to surprise him." They spent the rest of the afternoon strategizing. The agent sketched out the layout of the underground arena from memory, noting exits, security positions, and blind spots. "They'll be expecting me to come in unprepared," he said, "but I'm going to use every second I have." His friend leaned back, thoughtful. "You're going to need an edge. Something he won't see coming." The agent thought for a moment. "He likes to taunt his opponents. Get in their head. If I can stay calm, use his anger against him, I can make him sloppy." "Good," his friend said with a nod. "But remember, this isn't the FBI anymore. No rules, no fairness. He'll do whatever it takes to win. You need to be ready for that." As the sun began to set, they moved to weapons training. Not because he could bring one into the fight, but because understanding weapons gave him an advantage. His friend showed him how to defend against hidden blades, how to read body language for signs of a sneak attack. Every detail mattered. By the time night fell, he was exhausted, but sharper than he had been in years. The training wasn't just physical, it was mental. For the first time since receiving that message, he felt a flicker of confidence. Back at his apartment, he showered quickly, then sat at his desk. He pulled out a small notebook and began writing down everything he knew about the crime boss. His habits, his temper, his weaknesses, every scrap of intel he could remember from his FBI days. This wasn't just a fight, it was a chess match, and he intended to be 3 steps ahead. He took a deep breath and reached for another contact, an old FBI tech analyst. They hadn't spoken in years, but he sent a simple message. Need intel. Victor Moretti. Urgent. Within minutes, a reply came back. You don't quit, do you? Check your email in an hour. True to her word, a file arrived soon after. It contained updated photos, known associates, and even some whispers about the underground fighting ring. He studied every page, committing the information to memory. One detail stood out. Victor had an old shoulder injury from a street fight years ago. It was minor, but it could be a weakness. As midnight approached, he sat in silence, the weight of the upcoming fight pressing down on him. He picked up the photo of his partner again, the one he'd looked at the night before. The promise he'd made all those years ago echoed in his mind. If anything ever happens to me, keep her safe. He closed his eyes for a moment, then whispered, I won't fail her again. When he finally lay down, he didn't sleep. Instead, he visualized the fight over and over, each move, each counter, every possible outcome. He knew tomorrow night would be brutal. He knew he might not walk away. But one thing was certain. He would do whatever it took to bring her home. The city lights glittered against the dark night sky as he drove toward the casino. It felt strange how everything outside seemed so normal. Tourists laughing, cars honking, music spilling out of bars, while he was heading straight into a trap. He had prepared himself all day, but there was still a weight in his chest, a heaviness that came with knowing this might be the last night of his life. He parked a few blocks away and stepped out of the car, adjusting his jacket. The streets were alive, but none of it mattered. Every sound and movement faded into the background as he focused on the mission. Get her out alive. His training had kicked in hours ago, his mind now razor-sharp. He'd memorized the exits, the guard placements, the rhythm of Victor's underground empire. But even with all his planning, there was one thing he couldn't control, the fight itself. Inside the casino, everything looked the same as the night before. Bright lights, laughter, the clinking of chips. To anyone else, this was just another evening in Las Vegas. But for him, every detail felt heightened, every step heavy with anticipation. He followed the same path as before, past rows of machines and poker tables, toward the back where the private elevator waited. The same guard stood by the door. Without a word, he flashed a cold, approving smirk and swiped his keycard, granting access. As the elevator doors closed, the agent took a slow breath, his hand brushing against the hem of his jacket, not for comfort, but for reassurance. His gun was hidden there, though he doubted he'd get a chance to use it. The rules of this fight would be strict, and Victor's men would be watching him closely. The elevator ride felt longer this time. When the doors finally opened, he was met with a dimly lit hallway lined with guards. They escorted him down the stairs into the underground arena. The muffled voices from the night before were now loud and clear. Cheering, shouting, laughter. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol, sweat, and anticipation. As he stepped into the main chamber, the energy in the room shifted. All eyes turned to him. Some of the crowd clapped, others jeered. This wasn't just a fight, it was a spectacle. Wealthy gamblers filled the velvet seats, their faces lit by the glow of screens displaying odds and bets. Cameras hung from the ceiling, capturing every moment for those watching remotely. This was entertainment for them, a dangerous game played with real lives. He scanned the room quickly, his eyes landing on her. She was still locked inside the small glass cage near the ring. She looked pale and exhausted, but when she saw him, a flicker of hope lit up her face. He gave her the slightest nod, silently promising he would get her out. Victor Moretti stepped into the ring with the confidence of a king surveying his empire. He was bigger than he remembered, broad shoulders, a thick neck, and scars that told the story of a man who had survived more fights than he could count. He wore black shorts and tape around his hands, smiling like this was all just a game. The crowd roared at his entrance, chanting his name. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen." Victor's voice boomed across the room. "Tonight, you're about to witness something special. This man right here," he pointed at the agent, "was once one of the FBI's best. A man who ruined lives, tore apart families, and put good men behind bars. Tonight, he faces justice. Tonight he faces me." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Victor smirked, pacing around the ring like a predator. And just to make this interesting, he gestured toward the cage where she sat, trembling. If he wins, she walks free. If he loses, well, you all know how this ends. The crowd roared even louder. Money exchanged hands in the audience as bets poured in. Some were cheering for Victor, some for him, but no one in that room cared about their lives. For them, this was entertainment. A guard handed him a pair of worn boxing gloves. He slipped them on silently, his eyes locked on Victor. Every sound faded except for the pounding of his heart. He stepped into the ring, the lights blinding and hot overhead. The referee, one of Victor's men, gave a quick, unenthusiastic rundown of the rules. No weapons. No interference. No mercy. The bell rang. Victor moved forward first, slow and confident, testing him. The agent stayed light on his feet, hands up, watching closely. Victor threw the first punch, a heavy swing meant to intimidate rather than hit. He dodged easily, but he could feel the power behind it. Victor wasn't just a crime boss, he was a trained fighter. The first round was all about survival. Victor was aggressive, throwing heavy punches, trying to back him into a corner. The agent kept his distance, blocking and dodging, waiting for an opening. The crowd booed, wanting action, but he ignored them. He wasn't here to entertain. He was here to win. Then Victor landed a shot. A quick jab, followed by a brutal hook to the ribs. Pain exploded in his side, and he stumbled back. Victor grinned, stepping in to press the advantage. Another punch grazed his jaw, making his vision blur for a moment. He forced himself to focus. He had been hit harder before. He just needed to get through this round. The bell rang again, signaling a short break. He retreated to his corner, breathing hard. There was no coach, no team, just him. Across the ring, Victor laughed and drank water, taunting him. "You're slower than I thought," Victor called out. "This is going to be fun." The second round started, and this time, he changed tactics. Instead of backing away, he moved in closer, forcing Victor to adjust. He landed a quick jab to Victor's chin, then ducked under a swing. Victor snarled, annoyed, and threw another punch, but this time he was ready. He stepped to the side, using Victor's momentum against him, and landed a body shot. It wasn't enough to hurt Victor badly, but it was a start. Victor's expression shifted slightly. This wasn't going to be the easy fight he expected. The crowd was on their feet now, cheering and yelling. The energy in the room was electric, every hit echoing through the underground chamber. He felt adrenaline surge through his body, pushing away the pain. He could win this. He had to. Victor came at him hard, swinging with raw power. He ducked, dodged, and countered, but one punch landed clean on his temple, sending him staggering back. His knees buckled, and the crowd roared. For a moment, everything felt distant, like he was underwater. He shook his head, blinking the stars from his vision. He couldn't afford to go down. Not now. He straightened, planting his feet firmly on the mat. Victor grinned, sensing blood, and charged forward. This was it. The fight was just beginning, and he knew it would only get more brutal from here. The room spun for a moment as he steadied himself, shaking off the hit. The roar of the crowd echoed in his ears, a deafening chorus of cheers and shouts that blurred into one sound. Victor circled him like a predator, smiling with the calm confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. The agent wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth and adjusted his stance, forcing himself to breathe steadily. He had taken worse blows before, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight. This was survival. Victor lunged again, throwing a heavy punch toward his ribs. He twisted, narrowly avoiding the impact, and countered with a quick jab to Victor's shoulder. The shot didn't do much damage, but it made Victor grunt in annoyance. Good. Any opening was a victory. He remembered the file his old contact had sent him the night before, the detail about Victor's old shoulder injury. That was his way in. He had to be patient. The fight wasn't about matching Victor's power. It was about wearing him down, making him sloppy, turning his own strength into a weakness. Victor swung again, this time aiming for his head. He ducked, feeling the rush of air as the punch barely missed. His legs ached from the constant movement, but he forced himself to stay light, circling around the ring, jabbing at Victor's arms and ribs whenever he could. It wasn't about hurting him yet. It was about planting frustration. The crowd grew restless. They wanted a quick finish, but this wasn't the kind of fight Victor was used to. He was a brawler, used to overpowering opponents quickly. The agent's strategy was working. Victor's smile was gone, replaced with a flicker of irritation. "Stop running," Victor growled between clenched teeth. The agent said nothing. He stayed focused, his mind clear. Every time Victor charged, he dodged. Every time Victor threw a heavy swing, he made him miss by inches. Each miss cost Victor energy, while he saved his strength. Another swing, another miss. This time, he ducked low and drove a sharp punch into Victor's injured shoulder. The reaction was immediate. Victor winced, his arm dropping slightly. The agent stepped back quickly, avoiding a counterattack. The crowd gasped at the sudden shift in momentum. Victor's glare hardened. "You think you're clever, huh?" The agent stayed silent, his breathing controlled. He had found the weak spot. Now he just needed to survive long enough to exploit it. The bell rang, signaling the end of the round. He returned to his corner, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. He leaned against the ropes for a moment, his mind racing. He couldn't let Victor regain control. The man was dangerous, not just because of his size, but because of his ruthlessness. He'd cheat if he had the chance. That's what made this fight even more dangerous. As the next round began, Victor came out swinging harder than before. His frustration was boiling over, and he was no longer fighting smart, he was fighting angry. This was exactly what the agent wanted. He ducked, dodged, and moved with precision, letting Victor tire himself out. Every time Victor overextended, he landed a jab or a quick strike to the shoulder. The crowd was electric now, shouting with every blow. The tension in the room was palpable, and even Victor's men at ringside began to exchange nervous looks. They weren't expecting this. Victor roared in frustration and charged forward recklessly. The agent sidestepped, hooking Victor's arm and twisting it sharply. Victor stumbled, nearly losing his footing, and the crowd erupted in gasps and cheers. He backed up quickly, not wanting to give Victor a chance to retaliate too soon. Victor's face was red with anger, sweat dripping down his brow. "You're dead," he spat, his voice hoarse. The agent stayed calm. "We'll see." Victor charged again, but this time the agent was ready. He ducked low, spinning behind Victor, and drove his fist into the injured shoulder again, harder this time. Victor roared in pain, stumbling forward. The crowd was on their feet now, shouting louder than ever. He had the upper hand, but he knew it wasn't over. Victor was dangerous even when wounded. He could see it in his eyes. He was furious, and fury could make him unpredictable. They traded blows again, and this time Victor managed to land a punch to his jaw. The impact rattled him, sending him staggering back into the ropes. The world tilted for a second, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay upright. He couldn't afford to go down. Not now. Victor moved in for the kill, swinging wildly, but his punches were slower now. Sloppy. The agent ducked under a heavy hook and countered with a jab to Victor's ribs, followed by another sharp shot to the shoulder. Victor growled in pain, swinging again, but his injured arm didn't have the strength it once did. The fight was shifting. For the first time, Victor looked unsure of himself. From the corner of his eye, the agent saw her watching him from the cage, her hands gripping the bars tightly. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else. Hope. That look gave him strength. He couldn't lose. Not here. Not tonight. Victor swung again, but this time the agent grabbed his arm, twisted, and drove him to the mat with a perfectly executed throw. The crowd erupted in chaos as Victor hit the ground hard. He scrambled to get up, but his movements were sluggish now. The agent stepped back, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his brow. This was his moment. Victor got back to his feet, breathing heavily, his expression furious. He charged one last time, throwing a desperate punch. The agent ducked under it, stepping to the side and locking his arm around Victor's neck in a chokehold. Victor thrashed violently, trying to break free, but the agent held firm, squeezing with every ounce of strength he had left. The crowd screamed, some cheering, some yelling for Victor to fight back. The struggle felt endless, but finally, Victor's movement slowed. His strength waned, and then he went limp. The room went silent for a moment, stunned by the sight of the man they thought was unbeatable lying motionless on the mat. The agent released him carefully, stepping back, his chest heaving. The referee hesitated, glancing at Victor's men, unsure what to do. But the crowd erupted into cheers and shouts, forcing him to raise the agent's hand. Against all odds, he had won. He turned immediately to the cage where she was being held. Her eyes were wide, tears streaming down her face. He moved toward her, but before he could reach her, chaos erupted. Victor's men swarmed the ring, shouting orders, their hands reaching for weapons. This wasn't over. Not yet. The room exploded into chaos the moment Victor hit the ground. His men shouted orders, some rushing toward the ring, others surrounding the cage where she sat frozen in fear. The cheers from the crowd quickly turned into a mix of panic and excitement as people realized this wasn't part of the show anymore. The agent's body ached all over, every muscle screaming in pain, but his mind was sharp, his instincts screaming at him to move now or die here. He sprinted toward the cage, weaving past two guards who tried to block him. One swung a baton, but he ducked, slamming his shoulder into the man's stomach and sending him crashing to the floor. He reached the cage, his hands fumbling for the lock, but it was secured with a heavy padlock. "Hold on," he said to her, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Her eyes were wide, filled with tears, but she nodded. He looked around quickly, spotting a fallen guard nearby. The man had dropped a keyring. He dove for it, snatching it up just as another guard lunged at him. This one was bigger, stronger, and angrier. The agent felt the air leave his lungs as the guard tackled him against the side of the cage. His head throbbed from the impact, but he didn't let go of the keys. He swung his elbow hard, catching the guard across the jaw, then shoved him away and scrambled back to the lock. His fingers shook as he flipped through the keys, trying them one by one while the sound of chaos echoed all around. Victor's men were swarming, shoving through the panicked crowd, but the spectators weren't staying put. Some were running for the exits, others pulling out phones to film, and the noise was deafening. Finally, the right key clicked. The lock fell to the ground, and he yanked the cage door open. "Come on," he said urgently, grabbing her hand. She stumbled out, nearly falling, but he caught her. For a moment, she clung to him, her body trembling, and he felt a surge of relief, so strong it nearly broke him. But there was no time. A shout from behind made him spin around. One of Victor's top men, a towering figure with a shaved head and a gun, was pushing through the chaos, his eyes locked on them. The agent's heart pounded. He didn't have his gun. It had been taken when he arrived. All he had were his hands, his training, and a plan. He grabbed her hand tighter and pulled her toward the side of the arena, where he remembered a service door from his earlier observation. The crowd was so thick that it slowed down Victor's men, but it also slowed them. People screamed and shoved as they tried to escape the mayhem. The gunman fired a shot into the ceiling, and the entire room froze for half a second. That was all the agent needed. He shoved through the crowd, dragging her with him, his eyes locked on the door. Another shot rang out, this one hitting a metal beam nearby. The sharp ping made her flinch, but he didn't stop. They reached the service door, and he slammed his shoulder into it. It burst open, revealing a narrow hallway lit by flickering fluorescent lights. "Go," he barked, pushing her forward. They sprinted down the hall, their footsteps echoing loudly. Behind them, shouts echoed, followed by the pounding of footsteps. He knew they didn't have long before Victor's men caught up. He scanned the hallway, looking for an exit sign, a stairwell, anything that could lead them out. Finally, a red exit sign glowed at the end of the corridor. He shoved the door open, and they found themselves in a dim parking garage. The cool night air hit them like a wave of freedom, but it was short-lived. A black SUV screeched around the corner, headlights blinding them. He yanked her to the side just as the vehicle came to a halt. More men spilled out, guns drawn. They were trapped. He quickly assessed their surroundings. To the right was a stairwell. To the left, rows of parked cars. Straight ahead, more armed men closing in. His pulse pounded as his mind raced. He spotted a security booth nearby, and next to it, a fire alarm switch. "Stay behind me," he whispered to her. She nodded, clutching his arm. He darted toward the booth, bullets ricocheting off the concrete around them. The guard shouted, but he reached the alarm and yanked it down hard. The piercing wail of the fire alarm echoed through the garage, and in seconds, sprinklers erupted overhead. Water rained down, soaking everyone and everything. The chaos worked in their favor. The men hesitated, distracted by the sudden downpour, and in that split second, he lunged at one of them. He knocked the gun from his hand and delivered a sharp blow to his jaw, sending him to the ground. He grabbed the gun and turned it on the others, firing a warning shot into the air. "Move," he shouted at her, motioning toward the stairwell. They sprinted together, weaving between cars as bullets flew past them. He returned fire when necessary, careful not to hit anyone but buying them precious seconds. They reached the stairwell, slamming the door behind them. They climbed quickly, their wet clothes clinging to their bodies, their breaths ragged. By the time they burst out onto the street level, the sound of sirens filled the air. The fire alarm had triggered an emergency response, and now red and blue lights flashed in the distance. He spotted his car parked a block away. They ran for it, slipping through the growing crowd of onlookers. He unlocked the doors, shoved her inside, and jumped behind the wheel. As they sped away from the casino, she sat in the passenger seat, her hands shaking. She glanced at him, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "You're safe now," he said softly. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she let out a shaky breath. I thought. "I know," he said gently. "It's over." They drove in silence for a while, weaving through the city streets, until they reached a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. He parked near a small park, far from the chaos they'd left behind. The sirens were distant now, replaced by the soft hum of the car's engine. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you come for me? You could have been killed." He looked at her, his jaw tight, eyes heavy with emotion. "I made a promise," he said, "to your father. I swore I'd protect you no matter what. And I wasn't about to break that promise." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was gratitude. She leaned over and hugged him tightly, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. For the first time in years, he felt a weight lift off his chest. The next morning, news reports filled every channel. Police raided Victor Moretti's casino and uncovered his underground empire. His arrest was only a matter of time. The agent had made sure of that by sending an anonymous tip before the fight. Sitting on a park bench with her beside him, he finally allowed himself to relax. The city was waking up, the sunlight warm against his face. For the first time in years, he felt peace, not because the danger was over, but because he had kept his word. She looked at him with tired eyes, but managed a small smile. "What now?" He glanced at her and returned the smile, faint but genuine. "Now we live." The chapter of violence, fear, and guilt that had haunted him for so long finally felt like it was closing. He knew he would always carry scars, physical and emotional, but at least he had done the one thing that mattered most. He had saved her, and in doing so, maybe he had saved himself.